Welcome back for my July wrap-up. I read 5 books this month, crossing off 4 books from my summer TBR, absolutely unheard of. Not the best month in terms of ratings, but all books I have been meaning to read. Please let me know in the comments what you read this month and how you enjoyed them. I'd love to hear because your recommendations are always so on point. So in July, I continued my Jane Austen rereads, this month reading Persuasion. I had forgotten how much I like Persuasion, or perhaps I liked it more now that I'm older. Anne Elliot is definitely one of Jane Austen's more mature main characters, and I think that even the setting is the closest to being relatable to modern life. While at first glance it's almost fairy tale-like, her sisters are insufferable. One acts like the epitome of a mean stepsister, the other is ever complaining and selfish. The mother has passed away and the father is so obsessed with money and just is ridiculous in his actions. But then the way this translates into the story, people who would rather live in debt than show the outside world that they can't afford their lifestyle, the obsession about how you look physically and how you appear in social standing to the outside world, the whole concept of keeping up appearances. And as for the plot, how this ties into everything is that Anne, our main character, initially lets herself be influenced by all that, leading her to refuse to marry Frederick Wentworth, despite their obvious love for each other. But over time, she comes to realize that this was a mistake, and it leads to Anne being a very introspective and mature heroine who I definitely had so much awe for in this rereading. I also think that Persuasion has some of the most beautiful romance moments. I know that Pride and Prejudice is so much more known for that, and I think that Persuasion is just really underrated. Since I've also been talking about the movie adaptations of the Jane Austen books, I think that Persuasion must be the worst book-to-movie adaptation of the Jane Austen books of all time. I rewatched it solely for the purpose of this video because I already knew I didn't like it, and so I came to the same conclusion as last time, except that now I knew what was coming, which made it all the more cringy. While I prefer the more authentic adaptations, I do not mind a modern take, but I draw the line at Anne Elliot declaring she is single and thriving. I don't know what they were thinking, and truthfully, Jane Austen wrote strong female characters that were already ahead of their time. There is really no need to modernize them, especially if that means you're going to have them speak in lines that sound like Facebook posts they would later delete. And Ristoli was kind of boring. The only good thing I have to say about this adaptation is the casting, which was actually pretty good. This is probably the harshest review I've ever done on my channel, and it's not even about a book. So anyways, moving on. From my favorite this month to probably my least favorite, which was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I had mentioned putting this on various TBRs that I was not really looking forward to reading this book because I kept hearing things about it that did not make me want to read it anymore. And it seems the warnings were justified. I know this is a book that many people love too, so I'm sorry, it just was not for me. I think at first I was put off just a little bit, but very similar to other romance books by the cringy moments and the many, many unlikely events. I mean, we want a surprising meet cute, and it does not need to be too realistic, but I felt like it was taken to a whole other level. But I kind of forgot about that because afterwards my main concern was how this book deals with topics of trauma, abusive relationships, and suicide. So a lot of content warnings to start off. But abusive relationships are the main topic of this book, and I feel like I saw the aim to give a nuanced view of these relationships and show how it's not that easy to leave them as it may look from the outside. But I felt that in the end, to me, it was more giving a romanticized view of them, which I really didn't like. And I think in general it's just not the type of book I want to read, so I wouldn't recommend it. And if you do decide to read it, do take care and check the content warnings. All that being said, I do actually enjoy the writing style itself. I did chuckle and laugh at the lighter moments in the book, and I read Verity a while ago, which was not a favorite, but it wasn't bad either. So if you have a Colleen Hoover book recommendation that you think is better than It Ends With Us, do let me know. Next, I read another classic of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This was actually a reread for me. I read it in high school as compulsory reading for my English class, and because we had an excellent teacher, I actually quite appreciated this novella. But it had been so long, and I'm having some classics read and reread momentum, so I figured I would try to keep it up. So as I said, Of Mice and Men is a novella, so it's very short. It is set in the US during the Great Depression and follows George and Lenny. They are on the run from an old job where Lenny, who is kind-hearted but due to his mental illness, which makes him not always realize how people will perceive or interpret his actions, got them in trouble. And so they are making their way to a new place of work, and George is kind of trying to put some systems in place to make sure Lenny doesn't get into trouble again. Because he knows he means no harm, but people don't always understand that, and also because Lenny just doesn't understand the extent of his strength sometimes. Aside from the first few paragraphs, I don't think the writing itself is particularly beautiful, but I do think that it makes an important contribution to literature. It covers some really important topics of that time, including sexism and racism, and mental health is also really central to this book. However, the way it is written is really reflective of the state of sexism and racism in that time in history. So just to warn that there are racial slurs, there are very degrading comments towards women and towards people with disabilities. And while I've read it as a critique on how society treated people at that time, I know that maybe not everyone wants to read this. I think the larger picture is also a critique on the American dream, and it also has some really beautiful depictions of how friendship between the two main characters. For the length of this book, I actually think that the author did an amazing job at creating these very distinct characters. Some very likable, some not at all, but definitely all of them memorable. So overall, I think it's a good choice for a short classic, especially if you're trying to get into the genre, but it's not necessarily one of my favorites. Just glad I did a reread. I also read The Pearl Sister, which is book 4 in the Seven Sisters series by Lucinda Riley. It is my grandma's all-time favorite series, which is why I'm reading it, because historical fiction is not usually my thing. For those who don't know the series, it all centers around 6 sisters who have been adopted throughout the years by Pa Salt, a quite mysterious figure. And after his death, he leaves all of them with some clues as to find out more about their biological parents. So each book kind of takes us through the story of one sister figuring out her background, and usually includes some romance on the side. I had been putting off reading book 4 because while book 3 had me drawn more to the series because the character is super likable, the setting is a lot of cozy bookstores and the English countryside, book 4 I knew was not going to be like that. In fact, it's one of my least favorite sisters of what I knew so far. But I actually didn't mind it so much. So the Pearl Sister is Cece, who appears confident, bordering on arrogant, and who tends to dominate and speak for people. So as an introvert, really not my kind of people. But the book gave her character a lot more depth, and the books also always have a dual storyline, one in the present and one in the past, that explains a bit more of the history of their biological family. And that story is pretty interesting too. It's almost making me think that actually I don't dislike historical fiction as much as I thought I do. I actually quite like this format of going back and forth into time. It's a bit of a mystery or puzzle to see how these stories are going to end up connecting. So craft-wise, I'm pretty impressed with Lucinda Riley and how these plots are created. I'm struggling a little bit with the writing, and I've mentioned this before, but I don't know if it's because I'm reading them in Dutch or if that's just the way they are written. Anyways, I have 3 more books to go, and actually the final book, which will unravel the story of Passelt himself, just came out not too long ago, so it's motivated me a bit more to continue reading these. I also finally read Educated by Tara Westover, and I am so torn reviewing this book because I know that a lot of you really like this book, and I did enjoy it. I thought the story was incredibly interesting and really powerful. I thought her journey was amazing and absolutely one to be shared with the world, but I did have a little bit of an issue with the writing. Now, before we get into that, for those who don't know of Educated yet, it is a memoir written by Tara Westover, who grew up in rural Idaho in a Mormon community, not going to school until a chain of events kind of allowed her to leave her home and community and pursue an education. And now she even has a PhD, which is pretty impressive, to say the least. So the story itself is really interesting, and as for the writing, it's not that it wasn't beautiful, because actually it was, and I think that that was the problem for me, especially in the first few parts of the book where she is a very young girl at home and a dominant topic is abuse and neglect, and what was being said and the way it was written in my mind didn't match. It made me less immersed in the story because it just didn't feel authentic. And I'm not saying that it wasn't, it's just how it came across to me. Now, I have to admit that part of that might be me. Because of my profession, I have read many accounts of people leaving or trying to leave extreme religious groups, cults, or other extreme environments. So maybe because of that, I'm used to accounts that are a lot more raw and straightforward. And I think for these kind of stories, that is my preferred format because it just makes a lot more sense to me to be told that way. I don't like things embellished in these types of stories because I think it takes away from the story and the events. I also felt at the end of the book, I didn't really feel like we got the experience of the author herself. I don't feel like we really got much into the inside of how she experienced these things. It was more of a retelling of the events, almost as if it was from a separate narrator. We got some small glimpses here and there, but I thought this book was going to be a bit more personal and open. Now, of course, it's the author's full right to share or not share as much as she wants about what has happened to her. I just think that that was the reason why I didn't fully love this book. I just felt like there was so much more there. I would probably still recommend this book because I do think it's an amazing story and an important one to share. Just the writing put me off just a little bit. So those were the books I read this month. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe for more bookish content. See you next week and have a nice day.